The UK has rolled out the red carpet for Donald Trump's unprecedented second state visit. What does he want to get out of it? What does Britain want to get out of it? We'll discuss on this latest episode of the BBC's daily news podcast, Newscast. So our senior royal correspondent, Daniela Relph, is at Windsor Castle. Hello, Daniela.
Hi, Adam.
And Chief North America correspondent Gary O'Donoghue is not in America. He's also in Windsor. Hello, Gary.
I'm just outside the walls, Adam.
You haven't managed to break in yet. And where are you, Daniela, just in terms of the geography?
I am inside the walls of the castle, so I am quite close to the round tower inside a special media area that's been constructed inside the castle for this occasion. And actually this happens very rarely. Most of the time at Windsor we have to broadcast from outside where Gary is currently standing, but for certain occasions that feel big enough and qualify, and they are pretty big jubilees, the funeral of the Queen, there is a special media section that we're allowed to have inside the castle walls, and that's where I am today.
And Daniela, just paint a picture of how today has looked, because I mean the TV pictures have been really quite spectacular. Actually, I was quite impressed.
Were you? Yeah, it's been pretty impressive too. I've seen quite a lot of these state visits now, but I was quite impressed as well. It's been really interesting in the run-up because it's felt a little bit like everybody in the planning here has caught a bit of President Trump fever in terms of the language and the way they have been planning this event and talking about it. It's full of superlatives, and I include Buckingham Palace and the Ministry of Defence in that. Buckingham Palace, in the notes that they send out to us all beforehand, have talked about this being the biggest ever ceremonial welcome. The flags are bigger, the military bands are larger, the number of troops on the ground to welcome the President and First Lady have been more than we've ever seen before. And the same from the MOD. They've been talking about this being its huge size and scale and spectacle, it being unprecedented in terms of the numbers involved on the ground. And it felt like that as well. I was in the quadrangle of Windsor Castle earlier today as the President arrived, and that really was, I suppose, sort of peak moment for pomp and pageantry, seeing all the troops and the military bands lined up for the inspection of the Guard of Honour, for the national anthems, and it really was quite a show.
Although the one fly in the ointment, I would say, as a viewer and a spectator, was that carriage ride, which was just around the grounds, rather than being out in the real world, it felt a little bit kind of staged and a bit kind of almost lifeless.
There were two problems with the carriage ride, I think, that made it all feel a bit more sterile, I suppose. One, they were due to be open carriages. So the idea was that they would be open, you would see everybody, they'd go around the Windsor estate, but the weather wasn't playing ball. I mean, it didn't actually rain during the carriage procession, but the forecast wasn't looking great. So a decision was made by the Palace and by the White House to put to close the carriages off. So it was then really hard to see people inside them. And then you had this weird scenario of this kind of make-believe route through the castle ground to the Windsor estate that had to feel like a carriage procession, because of course all these things normally happen through Windsor town centre or down the Mall in central London. So it was all a little bit staged, and I think the combination of that and the weather made that element perhaps feel a bit more sterile than it might have done.
And Gary, this is a slightly ridiculous question, but we have to ask these things on days like this. Does it look like President Trump is being successfully flattered?
Do you know, I think so. Let me tell you why, because I had a very, very brief chat with someone who's been in and around this stuff all day inside, quite close up to it. And they said to me that he was, as they put it, sort of being really careful, and that their phrase was actually minding his P's and Q's. So, you know, this is not a president who's known for minding his P's and Q's, and this is certainly not a president who kind of is used to submitting to a process like this. And I think you saw a little bit of submission, didn't you, today? A sort of perhaps not overawed by it, but prepared to sort of go along with it, enjoy it, and of course because it was all directed at giving him a good day. And when you do that to the president, he's particularly appreciative. And the British have learnt since that famous moment in the Oval Office with the King's letter and Keir Starmer, you know, handing it over. They have learnt a sort of method, I think, of dealing with President Trump that perhaps some other countries have sort of mimicked ever since.
And also, Gary, this is a bit of speculation, but this idea that, or the reason it's given for the sterile carriage route was security, especially after the assassination attempts. Does that ring true when actually you see Trump in his day-to-day life in America? Are his appearances that secured when he's at home, or actually maybe is this just being used as a bit of a convenient reason to avoid protesters?
There's two things I'd say about that. One is, when I spoke to him a few weeks back, I got the absolute distinct impression that he was kind of pretty, as you would be, pretty affected by that attempt. That's that attempt on his life that I saw, and then obviously the subsequent one. So I have no doubt that President Trump is a bit nervous about being exposed to large crowds. I think the second thing is worth saying is that, the sort of carriage routes, around Windsor Park and not going through the centre of town. It was, there was a little bit of embarrassment, I think, last time around with the demonstrations and all that, wasn't there? And that the great big blimp, if you remember, it was in Trafalgar Square or something like that. So I think that was a reasonable thing. Having said all that, of course, some of these state visits do go a little way along Windsor High Road, and there was none of that whatsoever. So I think there's some validity in that argument, but it was also about controlling the optics, and as they say in the PR industry nowadays.
What also has struck me about Windsor and state visits when they've been here is just how close the crowd gets when you do that carriage ride through Windsor town centre. So if you were on the Mall, you're actually quite a distance away. They put the crowds back into St James's Park and Green Park. When it's at Windsor, you are, literally within touching distance of those carriages. And I think that was another security factor for Windsor, in the sense that it is an added risk because it's smaller, the roads are tighter, and it would have been harder for them to secure it, to the police, the Secret Service to be happy with the security they could range around that.
And Daniela, can we read any significance into the gifts that were exchanged? Because there's always presents going back and forth on these things.
There have been all of these visits, gifts today, as you would expect for a state visit. There is this very established exchange of gifts from both sides. I haven't got the list in front of me at the minute. Have you got it there, Adam?
I do, yes. Well, so there was one quite spiky gift, which is a bound leather volume marking the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, which obviously is a bone of contention between the two countries, or was back then. There was so that was the gift from Charles from the King to Donald Trump. Donald Trump gave him Eisenhower's sword. And Gary, I think that's quite significant, actually, because that's a sign of military cooperation. Is that a subtle hint that actually Trump is maybe a bit more involved in NATO than we might have thought?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, Eisenhower, of course, was the kind of, whatever they were, the overlord of Allied forces when D-Day came around in Britain at the time. He was the boss. It was an American led operation conducted from these shores, and I think that was meant to send some sort of message like that. But you're right, interestingly, about the sort of the book in terms of the Declaration of Independence, and it's one of those things that the British Embassy actually every 4th of July, or quite often on the 4th of July in the United States, sends out these sort of rather playful tweets saying, if you fancy coming back home, you'd be more than welcome, etc., etc. So there's a bit of that. I mean, some of the other gifts were a bit dull. I think there was a bowl, wasn't there, given to Melania, and I think she gave someone a handbag, and someone got a Tiffany brooch. I think that might have been the Queen.
That was the Queen, yeah. Gary, an Anya Hindmarsh handbag is not a boring gift.
And the flag as well.
Oh yeah, Daniela, explain the flag.
Yeah, the flag, another gift. A lot of the time, these gift exchanges, I've got the list up in front of me now, can be quite quirky and a little bit odd, as we can see in some of these. But yeah, there is a gift from the King and the Queen to President Trump specifically. It is the Union flag that was flown above Buckingham Palace on the day of President Trump's inauguration on the 20th of January 2025. So quite a niche gift, but I suspect perhaps something that the President will really like, very much targeted at him.
Beat some of those gifts, doesn't it? Do you remember? I think it beat when you and I were political correspondents. I think didn't Barack Obama give like Gordon Brown like a DVD box set, which you think, come on, that's That's a bit lame. So it beats some of those, that sort of thing.
And also, famously, that DVD box set was in an American format that you couldn't even play in the UK. So that was a bit disastrous. Now, we're actually recording this episode of Newscast at 6:30 because it takes a little while to edit it and publish it. You probably won't be listening to this till after 8:30 on Wednesday night, which means we can talk about what they're going to eat at dinner, because actually that is embargoed until 8:30. So we've been able to see it now, but we can't tell anyone about it till 8:30. So the magic of podcast timing means we can talk about it now. So, right, what they're going to eat. Hampshire watercress panna cotta to start, chicken wrapped in courgettes for main course, and then a vanilla ice cream bomb with an E. And then what I think is really interesting is the drinks they're going to have. So afterwards, they're going to have 1945 vintage port, which is in recognition of Donald Trump being the 45th as well as the 47th president of the United States. They're going to have cognac champagne from the year of the president's mother's birth, 1912. And they're going to have whiskey, which was a gift to the late Queen in 1980. And there's a special transatlantic cocktail called a transatlantic whiskey sour.
Yeah, but he's going to have none of those because he's teetotal, don't forget.
Well, I was thinking that too, but then you listen to this cocktail. The Transatlantic Whiskey Sour is a UK-US twist on the classic whiskey sour, which blends the smoky depth of Johnnie Walker Black with the bright citrus of marmalade. It's crowned with a pecan foam and garnished with a toasted marshmallow set in a star-shaped biscuit, evoking the warmth of a fireside s'more. So, Daniela, even though Trump won't be drinking a cocktail, it will still kind of look pretty cool and American.
I think so. Is it just me, or does that sound a bit sort of sick-inducing, that cocktail slightly? I quite like the idea of a whiskey sour, but all the extras I'm not so sure about. Yeah, it does, yeah. I did wonder whether it is a little bit harder when you have a teetotal visitor, because sometimes these drinks can be, a favourite wine or a favourite drink of the guest. But if you've got someone who doesn't drink, you have to sort of look around the edges of what you can provide that feels like it's personal and is something that they would like. Hence why we've got a lot of things connected to the birth date of his mother, the number of president he is, and all that kind of stuff. So I suspect it wasn't as easy to put this menu together. Also, I don't think he's renowned as a foodie. Would that be fair to say about the president? So again, they've had to draw, a relative. I mean, these royal menus are always quite fancy, but by royal standards, that's probably quite a simple menu.
And also, just in terms of the guest list, it's all the people you'd expect there. But quite interestingly, Sir Richard Moore is on there. Now, he is the outgoing head of MI6 and often talked of as, one of the choices that they would have gone for the ambassador job in Washington if they'd gone down a more traditional route rather than the Mandelson route. So I wonder if that's a little clue, or maybe he's just there because he's the outgoing head of MI6, so it's a nice treat for him at the end of his job. Now, I also noticed one of the guests at the banquet is Tim Cook, CEO of Apple, which is a good excuse to bring in Faisal Islam. Come on in, Faisal.
Thank you very much.
Sit down there.
Price is right.
Yeah, exactly. Faisal's just getting... Anyway, any observations on the menu and the guest list, Daniela? And also, actually, on the guest list is the Prince of Wales, and he's been quite actually involved in all of this, hasn't he?
So the Prince and Princess of Wales were actually the first people to meet the President and First Lady as they arrived at Windsor today. They formed that welcoming party, and I think they are a pretty important part of what has gone on here today and what we'll see at the state banquet. We know that the President likes William. He met him in Paris at the reopening of Notre Dame, talked about how good looking he was, how he liked him, and I think there's no question that the government, the royal family, that know that William has a connection with the president. He likes to see him. And actually tomorrow, importantly as well, in addition to that, in the wider picture of that, is that Melania Trump, the First Lady, is going to have a sort of girls' day out with the Queen and with Catherine, the Princess of Wales, again using the Kate and William card to a degree to try and soften up the president and appeal to the fact that he's clearly quite interested in the Prince and Princess of Wales. So yeah, they have definitely had a significant part to play in the day's events.
And Gary, the other half of the events tomorrow is the political half, when Trump is going to Chequers to have his one-to-one with Keir Starmer. Do we have any hints about how Trump is going to play that, or what he wants to achieve? Or maybe it's just actually he sees it as a bit more of a courtesy call rather than a big political moment?
Well, of course, there's going to be a whole bunch of business people there as well, and we've seen some pre-announcements about inward investment into Britain, and also big British pharmaceutical companies like GSK promising to spend a lot of money in the US. So all that will be vaunted, no question, tomorrow. There is a few wrinkles here. Don't forget this deal that the Brits were hoping to cut the steel tariffs that America is charging 25% as opposed to our general 10% tariff. That seems to have hit the buffers a bit. There's going to be a lot of talk about nuclear power and all this kind of cooperation, but there are some big, strategic stuff that these two don't agree on, namely Gaza, big one, Russia, big one, in global warming, big one. But the curious thing over the last few months is that when some other world leaders have sort of rubbed up against Donald Trump, even people he professes to like, he's not shy about, giving it some, and he's really held back when it comes to Keir Starmer. Just says, yeah, he's a liberal, but I quite like him really. So I think this is something Downing Street. This is their key aim tomorrow, obviously, to hold on to this kind of this relationship that means that Britain doesn't get it in the neck, like other people do.
Gary, thank you very much, and thanks to you too, Daniela. I'll let you go off for your transatlantic whiskey sours or alternative.
Thanks, Adam. Good to see you. Bye.
Thanks, Adam. Bye.
So Faisal, we'll talk about steel in a minute because that's the kind of like the blot on the landscape of this trip. But the thing that both the US and the UK are really celebrating is this huge tech deal.
Yeah.
And it's in two parts. There's a partnership between the two countries, and it's also come with loads and loads of investment news from big companies doing big investments.
Yes.
Where do you want to start?
Well, I'm really glad to be here because it's actually quite a calm and decompressing sort of zone after having spent 2 hours with this guy, Jensen Huang. We've talked about before on
the boss
program,
of NVIDIA.
The boss of NVIDIA.
The chip company.
Which was just the most astonishing kind of travel through not just his view on the UK,
Right.
which I think many people will be kind of surprised about, given the general vibe around Britain.
Oh yeah, and so the reason you were talking
politically
to him was because he's one of the companies that are investing many millions and billions as a result of this.
Yeah. I mean, so take a step back.
Yeah.
It is the slate of the top 5 or 6 US tech companies, absent Tesla, that have all piled in with significant investments into the UK around the state visit. Now, I don't think the state visit has caused this. This is not like Donald Trump getting out his megaphone and ordering them to do it. It's the wrong way to look at it. I think a lot of this might have happened in any event, but it's been catalysed by the state visit.
And certainly all bundled together into one big package.
Well, and then it's been put in a giant wrapper, which is the prosperity deal, which is the country-to-country deal. Again, it's basically we'll stick to general similar regulatory arrangements without surprises. We're not going to regulate AI like the European Union has regulated. That has given general confidence. We'll see, for example, I've been told by cabinet ministers that, for example, we haven't given way or it's not on the table the thing around the digital services tax, the so-called tech tax on the big social media giants, mainly American, or the online safety bill, which we heard, remember JD Vance, the vice president, raising when Keir Starmer was in the Oval Office. None of that is in there. Now, if some way along the line, the next 2-3 months at the budget or whatever, we find out that that law's a bit weaker, or maybe they're going to, roll it back a little bit on the digital services
because there is a
tax,
big AI piece of legislation coming that could be slightly different from what had been intended.
Well, the direction of travel, certainly from where we were 2 or 3 years ago, I think has been more regulatory freedom in this area than where we might have thought we were going to get, and than is occurring in the European Union. So it's a subtle thing, but that is also underpinning. I don't think we can underestimate, and I know some of the back channel that has happened since the beginning of the year, the focused effort of government on people like the guy that I met today, Jensen Huang, who, just so everybody understands, I would argue editorially, as economics editor, that this year he's the most important businessman in the world. And the reason why is he controls NVIDIA, which makes the chips that make AI happen, essentially. The most advanced chips in the world. There's a massive queue, not just from companies, but from countries for these chips, because they make those models fire. If you want to come up with a competitive AI model, you need these chips. And I think he's given 120,000, he sold, I should say, allocated 120,000 of the most advanced chips to the UK. And more than he's invested in a relatively small-ish company that he says is about to get very big, called N-Scale. That's a UK company that he says is going to be now a global leader, which wasn't really
What do they do?
Well, they take the chips and they turn them into, this is a new concept, Jensen Huang's concept, an AI factory, essentially, and you generate the sheer horsepower required probably horsepower is wrong as well, but you see what I'm trying to say.
The compute.
The compute, exactly, required for the unbelievable amounts of processing to make a model, to both generate the model, but also to do the processing of the queries afterwards. And here's a really important thing. We're all obsessed with ChatGPT and these chatbots, these LLMs as they're called. These models will exist for video, for photos, for language, all sorts of things. So here's the point. Jensen Huang and others, I heard from Google, our colleague Zoe Kleiman heard from Microsoft. They've always said, and it's just palpably true, that the science and research base, the universities, the labs, DeepMind, which is a global leader in AI research, Britain wins. But we haven't sort of turned that into massive business and economic growth. They say they're piling in. I have to say, the quotes that came out of his mouth today about Britain were sort of shockingly good. I put it like that.
Yeah, so what was he saying then?
Well, he was saying things like, okay, I declare now that the UK is an AI superpower. What does that mean? He also said that Britain is just far too humble, that all these great things going for the UK, that it's a golden moment for the British economy. It's a big bet on British growth. And as I said, when I'm in economics world and you sort of occasionally have a foray into Westminster world, it's obviously not the vibe you get. That's not to say that people in their homes are going to see, the inflation numbers came out today. How's that going to affect anybody?
Jensen Huang isn't affected by the cost of living, really, is he?
No, but in terms of in terms of the total investment, so you've got billions from Nvidia, I think it's 11, and because we check all these numbers, 5 billion from Google, 22 billion from Microsoft, and lots of other ancillary deals. The changes and the investments that are being made are fundamental and will underpin changes to the economy, possibly be that silver bullet for very low productivity that we have required. But more than that, changes to the country in the sorts of jobs that people do, not all of which will be positive. There'll be winners and losers. He admitted that in his interview with me. And so I think this is just one of those fundamental moments. And I am quite... as I said, fawning's the wrong word. Business leaders are good at hyping up the investments that they make. This was more than that.
Right.
They were genuinely. He was shocked.
But do you know what? Actually, why don't we let newscasters decide and play a little bit of your interview, and you can decide for yourself the vibe we're getting from the boss of Nvidia.
In order for AI to advance, you have to have AI research. And the researchers here, the universities here are fantastic. This is the third largest AI startups ecosystem in the world, only behind United States and China. And so I think that the moment is right. It's just missing the infrastructure.
It can be a superpower, the UK, really?
Well, this is the week. This is the week that I declare that UK will be an AI superpower. And that was the mandate from Prime Minister Starmer. He wants the UK to be an AI superpower.
Yeah, that's definitely beyond press release CEO guff, isn't it?
Yeah, and so I know Peter Carr went to see him, I think when he was in opposition.
The business
text messages, the business secretary now, he was then shadow technology secretary. Text messages have been flying. There was a similar moment that we've talked about on Newscast before at Tech Week in June, where he started talking like this and was like, "Oh, that's quite." I mean, almost like the dream business leader in the world you would want to be saying that is this guy. Assuming you can't get Elon Musk, who's obviously in a different place. I did ask him about that, by the way, which was very, very interesting. Which was like, are you going to have a word with Elon Musk about his views on the British government, on the UK generally? He deflected
the question.
Well, he did. He said Elon's a very good engineer, and he's and we back them, and he powers all their AI investments. So I think that this is important. It shows not just investment, but some degree of confidence from people that know what they're talking about in a sector that will affect the whole country and the economy. It doesn't mean everybody, suddenly all the numbers are going to go in the right direction, but it's definitely a sort of foundational investment. And I think you can, as he just said in that clip, he didn't have to say that. He rooted that in the personal conversations he'd had with the Prime Minister. And I think it's an example of the sort of background work the government have been doing in trying to change the climate that eventually yields fruits. Now, quite rightly, people were saying, well, what about the pharma industry? That's going in a different direction. There's investments that we're losing, which is absolutely correct. But I think if we were to pick one area of the world of business and technology that will change everything, it would be AI. Big questions. Obviously, we've now. Are we too dependent on US AI companies? Are we now in a sort of club with the Americans to try to kind of in some way take on the Chinese? Is that exactly where we would want to be? I mean, this guy, by the way, is a guy that walks in to see Donald Trump in the White House and the next week walks in to see Xi Jinping. Extraordinary to meet someone like that who can do that, who's now here. And he always wears, and doesn't really matter, but it's quite funny. His trademark is a black leather jacket, and he wears it everywhere. And I think he told us today he'd never not been depicted in a black leather jacket. But
does he just have one, or
I think it was alligator. I think I was picking out an alligator vibe. Anyway, I couldn't quite. Yeah. But he will, because of royal protocol, ditch the black leather jacket for white tie. He said today. So listen, I think it's important to note this. Notwithstanding the political problems that the government have had, so it's quite. I don't think they could have imagined a bigger win from global tech leaders. But they have a job with the pharmaceutical industry, and they haven't won everything from Donald Trump that they would have wanted to.
I just wonder how salient this all is with the public. So, for example, yesterday, me and Chris were talking about that line that the Prime Minister had used with the cabinet, saying we're in the fight of our lives between the people that want to talk the country down and are toxic, and the government who are embarking on a decade of patriotic national renewal. And the example they gave yesterday was, we've signed a civil nuclear partnership with the US. Now, that's not getting people's blood pumping, is it? I just wonder if this stuff is it's too economics editor level and not enough high street.
No, absolutely. Now, if you can get growth going, if you can get productivity up, if you can show to the OBR that this is plausible, reasonable, is happening. If investment levels go up, they have been hit, frankly, by years of economic uncertainty after Brexit, with the governments with 5 chancellors and 4 prime ministers in 6 months. If you can just get the investments back to normal,
and this is happening in the window when the OBR are doing their forecast that will form the framework for the budget.
I don't think that. Well, it may change the vibe, but I don't think that changes fundamentally in kind of the formula right now. But so you take the hit, but eventually it should feed in. These are significant investments. A currency trader told me that it was moving the pound. They thought there was so many dollars going to come in that the pound would be worth more, which is interesting. But if you can do this, not by November for the budget, but say over 6 to 9 months, show the investment pouring in, that will affect productivity. That will help your public finance forecasts. For, number one, but it also sends out a message, I think, to people with children, with kids graduating from school, going to apprenticeships, going to university, that there are hot jobs to have in Britain at the cutting edge.
The future is going to happen here.
Yeah. However, here's one of the other issues, obviously, which we've again talked about on AI, which is it may just be out there, and I think I'm getting some acknowledgement now from AI leaders, from tech leaders, actually from some cabinet ministers too, that right now that AI opportunity and talking about AI is slightly muted by a perception that some job opportunities that would be typical for people, the entry-level jobs, law, accountancy, creative industries, they're looking rather trickier because of the rollout of AI.
Well, yeah, because a huge data center is not like a huge car factory.
Well, exactly. Well, and they don't have as many jobs as you would like. Exactly. That's yours. They're quite empty. They're quite barren. I went and hung out at one. Do you know? It's like Fort Knox. You're not allowed anywhere near them. I think barely the Chancellor was allowed into the bit where the data all flows around. They're very secretive. They're very automated. How many jobs are created? And obviously the answer is the jobs are created in the use and deployment of the data. As I said, they're investing in these companies that probably didn't even exist a couple of years ago. How you spread that should create wealth, create growth, create productivity across industries. Is that going? The fact that it doesn't change the retail prices, inflation numbers doesn't mean it's a bad thing. But there are more sort of domestic, homegrown economic.
And just one other thing, you hear a lot of commentators saying, one of the reasons for sluggish economic growth in the UK is because energy prices are so high here. And then you see those tables and virtually every other country in Europe has cheaper electricity than us. The future is going to be electric because of electric cars and everything. Does this prove that actually electricity prices in the UK aren't necessarily a barrier to economic
Well,
growth.
they aren't a barrier, but that is an issue. And it's an issue that he had really quite interesting answer to, because the hope from the big tech companies, certainly pre-Trump, was that you could do this all in a green way and everyone could skip off into the sunset happy, high-tech, low carbon. That is being tested sorely, not least in America, because Trump's not interested in the net zero stuff. And some of the tech companies are like, oh, actually, we do need a lot of energy. Now, Jensen Huang said to me that actually he would, in the interim, we do need more gas turbines. Not just that you would need to almost...
As in like gas-fired power stations.
Yes. But
which is not compatible with Ed Miliband's carbon-free energy system by the end of this decade.
Well, there's technological solutions, we're told, but yes, it would but you're right, the general level of power need for the rollout of data centers is huge. And have they really answered that question? He says that in fact what you need is not just that, you need a separate grid because they're going to take up so much energy, and you don't want to annoy normal homeowners. We're seeing some of this in the Republic of Ireland, where they have a big tech sector, and some argue it's pushed up prices for consumers. There's debate around that. Has it affected electricity supply? These are big things. He says, of course, as all tech leaders say, well, we'll get AI to work out the problem and solve it.
And then just build a parallel national grid.
And they'll invent
when we can't even upgrade our
fusion energy.
One.
They'll
Right.
invent better solar panels, better wind turbines, and better gas power stations. So, yes, I think there is a recognition there that there is an issue. And despite those high energy prices, these investments have been forthcoming.
But I suppose the investments are pledges to invest over multiple years. If actually it turns out there isn't enough cheap energy in the UK, maybe those final few billions for in 20 years' time will go to France or Ireland.
Yes, and France, of course, made a big bet on nuclear power, which is and they're using that actively with the same people to say, look, come here.
Yeah, we can't bank all of these billions.
Baseload
today.
capacity. Exactly. So this is one of the reasons why this government has leaned back into nuclear power, and when you see Ed Miliband talking about it a lot. But yes, you step back from this and you think, yes, there are some successes here around the state visits, but it does just make you think, how much is the government, how much is British public policy, how much is the debate between the parties focused on these medium-term, like fundamental problems that are changing before our eyes? We try and keep them on that.
Well, no, it's that.
But occasionally it's a bit short-term.
And we've had this conversation so many times, haven't we? That the political language and this language are two different languages.
Yes.
You kind of need a translator.
Yes. Well, is that us?
Certainly you. Anyway, Faisal, thank you. That was so interesting. And you're going to come back to the Newscast studio tomorrow because our TV show is back on BBC One.
So,
You're going to be on it.
Black leather jacket.
Well, I mean, if there's one going spare, or white tie, your choice.
I'm a black leather jacket sort of tech bro type of pretend tech bro.
Well, at least you think you are.
Harsh.
It is jumper. Faisal, thank you.
Cheers.